آره.
Development, and it's week 6, part 5 of our video series, and we're going to be talking about authentication with JWT now. Alright, let's go back to our technical requirements page. So you should have connected to Heroku and MongoDB Atlas in the last video, and you should kind of have an understanding of the basics of cloud providers and how they work. And again, from your perspective, you should think of it as I'm going to work with an online container, an online storage solution, whether it's a virtual machine or something else that's running online. I'm going to push my stuff up to the server and this cloud host, whether it's Heroku or Microsoft Azure or a Google platform, and then some kind of database. And again, a lot of those services also offer databases, like, for example, Microsoft Azure also offers SQL databases, MySQL databases, and a bunch of other different things. And that's also a possibility. You can also connect online with one of them. So that's kind of the basics of how we connect, how we use them. So what are we doing in this video? We're going to switch our authentication technique and our technologies to move towards something called a JSON Web Token. So JSON Web Tokens, again, they send tokens from one server to the other, because we're going to move into a multi-server environment in the next video. When we move into Angular as a front end, our front end is going to be Angular, so that's going to replace all the Express views, all the Express stuff that we've done so far, gone. We're going to have more of an interactive, dynamic front end with a whole pile of new technologies with Angular. But we're going to still keep our Express backend to connect to things like our database, right, that we're going to have online and everything else. So we're going to convert eventually our Express server into an API, right, an application programming interface, where we can just feed out JSON data. And so what that's going to do is it's going to decouple eventually our the way we have our server done right now. Right now it's very tightly coupled in terms of our front end, back end. Express kind of takes care of both of that, both of those two things. But in the future, as we move forward, and it doesn't matter whether we use Express as a back end and Angular as a front end, or if we use Express as a back end and React as a front end, or some other kind of front end solution, or even a back end solution, we need to be able to take care of security at each point. Right. So, example, if I want to pass information from Angular, I want to, kind of our front end is requesting for data that's coming from the back end. Somehow, the front end itself has to authenticate or pass authentication information to the back end somehow, right? And that's what this JWT stuff is going to allow us to do. Okay. So after this, you should understand how it works a little better. We won't really see it in action until we move into an API structure, which we're going to do over the course of the next several videos. Okay, let's get started. So we're back to this. This is where we were last time. And on our front end right now, we have an authentication strategy which we use, which is a local strategy. All right, username and password. We're still going to use local strategy for now. We may, if we have time, move and try and do some OAuth with something like Facebook or Google or GitHub or LinkedIn or something else if we have time. And I might do that with you, or your professor might do that with you during the semester. We'll see how that goes. But for now, we want to stick to what we have, which is we've got a connection to Mongo. The connection right now is online. That's not going to change. There's no difference there in terms of how we're connecting, whether it's locally or remote. All right. So the tokens we're going to send back and forth, that's not going to change much. What we're looking for now is a way of storing things using local storage. And we'll talk about that in a bit. So we need to add some additional resources, more packages that allow that functionality. I'm going to bring up my terminal again and go into my second PowerShell. And let's add some more packages into our package.json file. Let's show you what that looks like at this point. So here's what we have so far. We have also some dev dependencies. We haven't really updated these we haven't needed to at this point, but here is what we're going to add some more stuff on the front end, and we might add some stuff from a dependency on the back end too. Let's see how it goes. Okay, so we need to add something called cores. Cores, if you look up what that is, and let's just make a new window, is cross-origin resource sharing. Cross-origin resource sharing is cores, and what we have to do eventually is kind of work between two different, this is actually a pretty good picture on Wikipedia. Basically we have a web server and we have two different servers as an example, and they're passing information between each other, right? And we want to be able to do this without having a security issue. So we're going to need a package called cores. So let's do that. So we're going to say npm install cores, right? And we're also going to install @types cores if we have it. And I'd like to get that kind of support. Now the thing is, let's do it one at a time, because one is going to be a dev dependency and the other one is going to be a regular dependency. Okay, so those two things. There we go. So there's did we add that in? Yeah, we did. Npm uninstall @types cores. See what happens. Npm install @types cores --save -dev, which is what I wanted to do. Alright, that's going to be put in the right spot now. Okay, good. So, and again, this is just semantic. I mean, do we really need to put this here or here? It's just the way. This means that these are not required. These are for us. These are all required packages. You need to have these. Okay. To make your project work. Next, let's add in a couple of packages. One is called JSON Web Token, and the other one is called Passport JWT, because we're still going to use Passport as our vehicle to connect and use JWT, JSON Web Tokens. All right, so npm install, we'll add them in first. So JSON Web Token is what it's called, the package, as well as Passport -JWT, and then --save. That is something we're going to need. There we go, those two. And then npm install, let's add the support. So @types /JSON Web Token and @types /passport -JWT --save -dev. All right, and --save -dev again, it adds it into this area. All right, so we've added our required packages. That's the first step. First step is getting these packages ready to go. And then the next step after getting the packages, of course, is configuring our application. Let's go into our server. Let's go into our app.js. There it is. And what we want to do now is we want to start replacing some of the stuff that we have here with the new way we're going to do things with JWT. All right, so from the top, let's get into this. We're going to add cores. So we're going to say let cores equal to require cores. Okay, that's the first step. And then what we're going to do is in our authentication module, sure, we're going to leave session alone for now, passport, and the passport local strategy, which is here. Between passport and passport local strategy, we're going to include our JWT stuff. So let's just make a space, more authentication. So let passport JWT is equal to require passport dash JWT. So that is the JSON Web Token interface for passport. And then JWT strategy, we're going to call this a new variable, is equal to passport JWT. We're going to make an alias dot strategy. All right, so that's what that is. So we have a local strategy and a JWT strategy. And we're going to also create an extract. We're going to extract the stuff that we need. So we're going to say let extract JWT, a way to extract the JSON Web Token, is equal to passport JWT dot extract JWT. So these are the requirements for starting it off. Okay, we're not going to touch Flash or the connection to MongoDB or any of this stuff. That all remains. That's not going to change anything. That routing and everything else we do right now in here is not going to change. Our views, we're not going to change our view engine right now, except eventually we're not going to use it. A logger and the JSON URL encoded, all this kind of stuff we're going to leave alone. This session secret we're going to leave alone. We're not going to need that right now. Eventually we're going to move out of this. Passport initialize and session also left alone. User model, leaving it alone. We're going to still use the passport strategy. We're going to use but now the create strategy is also going to include our JWT strategy. So it's not just one thing anymore. Serializing, deserializing data is still going to be there. And then just before our routes, now we're going to add in another piece, which is going to be the JWT piece. So we're going to say that let JWT options, we're going to configure the options. We're going to make a new object here. And we're going to say JWT options dot JWT from request. We're going to say that that is equal to extract JWT from auth header as bearer token. It's pretty long. So we're going to talk about the bearer token in a bit. The bearer token is something we're going to store in local storage. That bearer token is going to basically say, hey, I'm logged in or I'm not. Okay, that's what it's going to do. And then what we're going to do is we're going to say JWT options dot secret or key is going to be equal to db dot so here's something that we don't have in place right now. We want some kind of secret or key, and the secret is kind of like a passcode or whatever you want to call it, and we don't have one. I'm going to put one in db.js. So I'm going to go to db.js, and we're going to kind of create another object in here, which we're going to call secret. I don't know, we'll call it some secret, whatever that. That is, and I'm just going to, yeah, maybe we'll make it so that it is, I don't know, camel cased, upper camel cased, something like that, just to make it different. So URI in secret, okay, it's some secret. It's going to hold on to some of this information. This could change. We could also use this in other places. For now, this is okay. I'm going to save this. And then go back to what we were doing with our app.js. Sorry. Okay, so that's where we're going to store the secrets. We're going to say, hey, db.secret is what we're going to put in there. Okay, so we're just configuring at this point. And the configuration process, as you can see, is long, right? But we're going to have some great advantages after doing this, and this is why we're doing this thing, so that way we can decouple our back end from our front end. Okay, so now, so JWT options have been completed. Now we're going to have to kind of set up this new strategy. So we're going to say it's a new JWT strategy, and we're going to send in the JWT options, as well as we're going to pass in the JWT payload. Okay. And done. So that's going to be our two parameters. And what we're going to do is we're going to say user find by ID, right? The JWT payload, right? .id. That's what we're going to do. And it's going to be a kind of a promise-based solution here. So we're going to say, and then after we do that, we're going to go user fat arrow function return done. Okay. Alright, so what does this do? So basically we're going to find the user from the JWT payload, right? That's what we're going to say, hey user, go find the user in our database based on the stuff that you find up on in our bearer token, the token that you're going to find in local storage. And if it's true that we found them, then return the user back out again. That's what we're basically saying. Okay. However, if that doesn't happen, we want to catch if there's an error, any errors. This is using, again, promises. It's a different way of doing things. And we're going to say return done. And we're going to say it failed. That's what this false is. We're going to say it didn't work. And then we're going to put a semicolon here. So this strategy, we've just set up a strategy for how to get the token, compare it, get the user, and then once we get the user, we want to find the user by the token ID. And once we've done that, we're going to return yes, the user is found or not. Okay, so this is the main thing here. Okay, and then finally, before we do anything else, we're going to say passport.use. We're going to activate it, strategy. Okay, so that's what happens. So first, we configure the strategy, and then we activate it. Whew. All right, next. So down here, we're still doing our routing. This is actually, we should probably make a note of that. So routing. Okay. And that's really it from an application setup perspective. All right. And to test this locally, just to make sure that there's no errors, if we go back to PowerShell, you can see that we're good and we're connected remotely to our server. So this is all good. There's no issues with connections right now. Okay. And if we go up online to test this, so let's say, for example, if I go into localhost 3500, which is where our number is, you can see now we're still good. We can still look at this, log in, and it's not going to mess up anything because we're not using it yet, right? We're not using it. We're just making sure that nothing is failing. That's the first thing. Whenever you make a change like this, you're going to say, okay, wait, do things still work? And if things are still working, this is a good way of stepping forward. Yes, things are still working. We made these configuration changes, but it hasn't broken anything. Okay, that's number one. That's step number one. All right, so now that we've done that, and we've got the configuration changed for here, what we want to do is start incorporating this stuff into our routes and our controllers. So it doesn't modify pretty much anything on the front end necessarily. Let's start with our index controller. Okay, so again, now we're going to go to index controller. Our index controller looks pretty good. Remember, the controller is just the logic. There's no routing involved here. So when a route is called or something is called to work, we're going to use passport and mongoose and so on. You can see that some of these are grayed out, like router and mongoose seem to be useless at this point. and we can take them away. But we need to add in our JWT at this point, as well as our database before our user model. So let's do that. Okay, enable JWT. So we're going to connect to it. We're going to say let JWT equal to require JSON Web Token. And we're also going to see let DB, we're going to get a reference to that too, equals to require /config/db. Okay, so we need those two pieces. Our user model isn't going to change at all, but instead what's going to happen is when we authenticate, okay, so far the way it's been working is we authenticate with a login, and we use kind of a, this is the display login page, but when we authenticate, this is the piece that's important. This is why we're doing all this work. We need to change the way this function works, right? So we're not changing the routing. We're just changing the function. So we're still going to authenticate with local strategy. That's not going to change. So up to here, we're good. If there's no user, we're going to redirect. This is all the same, right? And then after we request login, we're going to get user information. If we get a server error, we'll do this. If not, we'll return and be redirected to the book list, right? This is the idea behind it. Okay, what if when we request login, what we also want to do is we want to create a payload. This is new. So we'll say new payload is equal to, we're going to make it a object, and we're going to say that the ID is equal to the user._ID. So that's the first thing. We're going to kind of create our payload. The display name is going to be the user.displayName. We're going to say that our username is our user.username, and we're going to say that our email is our user.email. So we're going to configure all that information in the payload. The payload's going to have that, kind of configured, and that's a const. That's not going to change. As soon as we get our user information when we log in, we're going to pass in the user information that comes in from the authentication piece up here, right? So notice that in Passport Authenticate, we're going to get that user info that we're going to get from the that comes from up here. So our user, request user, right? It's going to pass in that information right into our user information right in here. Okay. So that's where this is coming from. And once we have our payload, then we can add in our auth token. So this is the important piece. Auth token is, we're going to sign it. We're going to say JWT sign. And we're going to say, we're going to take the payload and we're going to do the db.secret. We're going to mash that in. And what we want is, let me just go in here and put a closing bracket. We're going to say expires in, and let's say 1 week. So 604,000 seconds. This is 1 week. You can put it smaller, but that's when the auth token will expire and have to be regenerated. Okay? Awesome. All right, we're not done yet. So that is the payload, right? And what this is going to do with this redirect, we're going to create the payload for us, and we're going to sign the payload, right? So that's what this does here. And again, this is something that we're going to be using when we set up authentication, right? So right now, again, we're just prepping to use it. We haven't used it yet, okay? But we're going to use it in a bit. And the way this is going to change is we're going to respond with a user object. So we can do a bunch of stuff when we redirect. So if I look at redirect, right? So res redirect, and let's look at what res redirect does for us. Okay, so if I look at, and this is res redirect is express, right? So let's take a look at that documentation wise. So if I say express.js.com redirect response dot redirect, or yeah, let's take a look and see how that works. So we have a bunch of different methods, right? And we want to create our router. So the express routers we're looking at here. So these are all this is the documentation for the router. And so I'm just showing you this because I want you to understand the way that this works. So if I look at, just looking to see if I can find that quickly. But basically what we want to do is we want to redirect with the response. Here it is. So we have a couple of options. So it says redirect status. We can put in a status code. So whatever the status code is, we can send the status code like 301 or 200 or whatever we want. And then the path. That's all we have an option of doing. Okay? That's all we have an option of doing. So we can't really respond with anything at this point. There's nothing for us to do with JWT. Okay. So we've made our payload, we've got our auth token, but we're not doing anything with it. Why? Well, we could respond with JSON. So let's say instead of res redirect, we could put out some JSON. So we say the way JSON works is something like this: res.json. Okay, and then we could put out an object. We can say success. We could say that's true. We could say we could kind of put out a message, which is user logged in successfully. Okay, we want to put that in, as well as pump out the user object, which is our user object. Okay, so ID is user._ID, which is similar to the payload. What we've done with the payload is just copy all this information here, so we don't have to do it again. Again, this is an opportunity for us to make it better eventually. And then followed by, once we've got our user object, followed by a token, which is our auth token. Okay, so that's what it's really going to look like. Eventually, we're going to get rid of this redirect because we're not going to redirect anywhere. Right? We're just going to pump out this thing right here, which is our response token. So we haven't changed anything here. All we're doing right now is we're creating a payload and we're outputting JSON data. And this is important because eventually our JSON data will be consumed by the front end. Right? So eventually we're going to get rid of this line here altogether, and we're going to replace res.json with a return res.json. Okay, we're just prepping for what we're doing here. All right, so how does the rest fire? So that's one part, and then the registration page, that doesn't change. The display is going to go away eventually. On the process registration page now, when we have a new user, all the same stuff happens on this part. We check to see if the user exists, and then what we do is instead of redirecting the user, redirect the user to authenticate them, right? We wouldn't do this anymore in the future. What we're actually going to do instead is we're going to send a message that says the user has been registered successfully. That's what we're going to do. We're not going to log them in, not from here. So we're just going to make a new res.json, a response.json, where I'm going to show you what this looks like in a second. We're going to delete it afterwards, or sorry, comment it out. But this, we're just prepping, like I said, where the message is going to be user registered successfully. Okay, so that's kind of registration with JSON response. Okay, so let's see how this looks so far. We haven't changed anything on the back end. We're just trying to use a payload. We kind of created a payload for ourselves, and let's see what that looks like. Okay, going back out to our code, and here it is. Let's refresh. Okay, and make sure that our we're still not broken. We're looking like it's pretty good. All right, let's log in, and let's watch for how this works. Okay, be careful. Watch what happens. So I'm going to go to min, and then our password, and log in. Then we get this. Okay. Okay, I want to show you this. Take a look. This is what we're going to get back now. All right. So it actually did two things. It says user logged in successfully, but we got this token, and that's what's going to come out. It's going to go to our front end when we need to. Instead of us having a complicated connection, this connection string here, this thing here, is going to trigger and respond out. It's going to be consumed by the front end. So that's how we're going to use our API. We're going to create this stuff just like this. But for now, we can hide and you can see that we're getting an error. Cannot send headers after they are sent, because what's happening is we're responding twice. That's why we're getting this error. We're responding with JSON web tokens plus everything else. So we're not going to do that. I just wanted to show you what that would look like. So in our area where we're responding with JSON, we're just going to comment this piece out right now. Okay, but we're going to come back and put it back in when we're ready for the API. So this is getting ready to convert to API. That's what it is, an application programming interface. We're doing that right there. We're going to kind of comment that out. And I'm also going to comment the registration piece out. It's going to be the same problem we're going to run into. So getting ready for to convert to API. That's what this part does. Okay, and let's make it to do so that it glows. What happens is in my version, I've got some packages and on the Visual Studio Code side that allows us to find to-dos. We'll do the same thing here, because then eventually what's going to happen is I'm going to forget, and I don't want to forget. I want to make that glow so I can see that, hey, there's a to-do that we can access right here. Okay. All right, cool. And you can see it kind of creates that in the gutter on the right-hand side. You can see there's two to-do. There's one here and there's one here now, and we can kind of go in there, and it's kind of like a stub for me to go in there and change. Okay, next, what we want to do is we want to start programming some stuff out for some of the other routes. So for our book route, as an example. So we've done our controller for index. Let's do our controller for book. So again, going back to book. So the same thing happens here. We have express, we have router. We don't necessarily need mongoose anymore. All right, I'm going to leave it there though, just for backwards compatibility. And we're going to say JWT is equal to require JSON web token. So we're going to get that in here as well. And where this is really going to help us is when we have to send messages back to the user by using JSON web tokens. And right now, the only time that we're going to do that is if I'm not going to do it yet, but we're just going to leave that in place here. So that's just getting ready for us when we move over, when we transition to an API. Okay, where we're going to get rid of the Express front end. Okay, cool. So that's that part. Let's look at the routes, especially the guard, the auth guard. So I'm going to go to our routes. And the first one we're going to look at is the index route. So let's go there. Index. And so you can see that really from this perspective, there's nothing to hide, right? This is all top level stuff. We should be able to log in and register and log out without having an issue. Okay, so this is going to be covered here. And the book route is where we might have some additional configurations that we're going to put in place. So the book route will need some JWT support. So again, we got router, we got Mongoose, we got Passport. Let's put in JWT up here, just so that way we can have it later on when we need it. Okay, so we're kind of making a reference. These are all references or dependencies, if you will, for each of the modules to pass. And require auth isn't going to change, right? Because if we're authenticated, we're still going to detect this. And if we are, we're good to go. If not, we'll know, right? So far, we're good. There's nothing for us to change on the routing perspective here, and we're not making any changes yet, okay? And that's really everything we need to do to get ready for what we're going to be doing going forward. So that's really it. I mean, we're not really adding additional. So we made all these changes. We haven't changed the book model. Let's make sure that we submit all of our changes so that we have everything. There's no changes pending. And I believe that is pretty much everything we need to do in order for us to enable JWT. We're ready to go with authentication. Okay, so that is it. And there's not much. Let's make sure that the website still works. So that's the first thing. So again, we'll save this. And we'll go back out to the web. And we'll move back into login. And I'll log in again this time. So man, shouldn't give me an error. It doesn't. And we can check this here. Right? See that we're good still. So everything is normal. We have our pieces waiting to take hold when we need them. Right now we don't need them because we're using Express and we're using sessions to make sure things are maintained. But eventually we'll move to an Angular front end, then we're ready to go. So now we've kind of enabled everything we wanted to do. And when we get back in the next video, we'll start learning about Angular and what it can do for us.
How do you do